Hey, how's it going? Today we're going to be talking about some camera basics, specifically exposure. And we're going to get into that right now. Hey, how's it going? Kyle here, helping you level up your photo, video, and music. And I am joined by the lovely Kish, who is a model talent that I've worked with in the past. I actually will be popping up some pictures of her and her social media, so you can go ahead and check her out. So Kish expressed to me some interest in learning about photography, so I thought it was a great opportunity for me to teach her some of the fundamentals and share it with all of you. Kish actually has a very interesting goal in photography. Kish, what was your ultimate goal?
So I'd love to take a picture eventually when I'm better. Take a picture of nude, beautiful women. Nude pictures of beautiful women, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trust me, we all do.
Yeah.
And on that note, if you are interested in photo, video, or music, don't forget to click that subscribe button so you can keep track of all the videos that I'm putting out there and we can learn from each other. So today I'm gonna be talking to Kish all about one of the most fundamental facets of photography, that is exposure, and how we can use three basic settings on a camera: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO to perfectly expose a photograph. Now, while there's a whole lot of other things that can be involved when you're talking about focal length and aperture, depth of field, when you're talking about shutter speed and capturing some fast motion, and ISO if you're doing night photography, right now I'm just gonna be sticking to some of the basic fundamentals. So I'm just gonna talk about what exposure is in the first place. What exposure is the balance between light and information inside of a photograph. If you're taking a picture of a scene like this, there's plenty of light, but if you have your settings configured incorrectly, you're gonna be overexposing or underexposing that picture, and what that's gonna look like, it'll look like a very dark picture, which would mean it's underexposed, or a super white picture where you can't even see anything, and that's gonna be overexposed. I'm a Sony shooter, but Kish is using a Canon. You got a Canon Rebel T6. So it's kind of interesting to have two different makes here. They're obviously different, but these settings are going to behave the same with both of these cameras. The only time where these fundamentals may not apply is if you have like a really basic point and shoot camera. I don't know if you have like a Polaroid camera or those disposable film cameras that you can still find on tables at weddings and stuff like that. If you can't control these settings in the camera, well, then the camera is like either really basic or it's doing the work for you. Either way, if you have like a particular like vision as to what you want the picture to look like, if you can't control these things, then you're going to be getting the image that the camera wants you to get and not necessarily what you want.
Very important.
So first things first, either play around with the camera or find the manual. You need to figure out how to manipulate those settings. Again, aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. I know how to do it in this camera. I think Kish, we walked through it and we were able to figure out how to control them in your camera, right?
Yes.
First is aperture. And what aperture is the size of the opening in your lens's iris, allowing light to come in through the lens and hit your camera's sensor. And that's measured in f-stops on your lens. So you either see like f 1.2, f2.8, f4, f5.6, so on and so forth. So the smaller the number, the wider the opening. Conversely, the higher the number, the smaller the opening. The size of that opening is going to either allow or constrict light from being able to enter the camera. So if we need more light to come into the picture, we need to have that opening be really wide, right? Again, there's a lot of other things that have to do with aperture. We'll talk about that another time. Next, we're gonna talk about shutter speed. And what shutter speed is the length of time that two shutters are exposing your camera sensor to light. So shutter speed is measured in seconds and normally fractions of a second. You can obviously go to 10-second, 30-second long exposures if you want to, if you're doing like super low light. The longer your sensor is exposed to light, the more light will be in your picture. So let's say we have 1/50th shutter speed. So what that means is that the shutter inside of your camera is gonna open up for 1/50th of a second, and then after 1/50th of a second, it's gonna close back up again. And actually, the sound that you hear when you take a picture is the shutter opening up. On your camera, you also have that mirror, right? And so you'll also hear the mirror moving, but essentially those are the moving parts inside of the camera, and that it gives you that satisfying camera.
I've never heard that before.
Sure, you've heard this before with all those naked ladies. So next we have, what was that? What was that picture? So next we have ISO, and what that does is control your camera sensor's sensitivity to light. So all else being equal, you crank up your ISO, there's going to be more apparent light inside of your camera. It's a callback from when you would buy rolls of film, you would buy ISO 100, 200, 300, 400, depending on, you know, where you were going to shoot. There's give and take to every setting, and if you go too high on the ISO, what you're going to be doing is, yes, that your sensor is going to be more sensitive to light, and there's going to be more light in the final picture, but there's going to be added some like grain, some noise. You always want to have it as low as possible, and either control the light into your camera using the first two settings, and if you can't do that, then you can introduce a flash like the one I have behind you right here. And what that will do is allow you to bring light into your picture without having to digitally amp up the light. So then you avoid, you know, all that noise and distortion that you're going to get from a lot of ISO. So watch what happens if let me see if I can crank up my ISO to compensate. If I take that picture, see that?
Yeah.
See how ugly that looks?
Yes.
Dean?
It looks like from a camera from the old phone.
yeah, totally.
The old digital phone.
So to reiterate, we have three fundamental settings that we talked about, right?
Yes.
The first one is aperture. What's aperture?
It is the size of the opening in the lens, in the camera.
Exactly. The size of the opening in the iris that allows however much light to enter the camera by way of the lens. All right, the second one we have is shutter speed. What's the shutter speed?
The eyelids.
The eyelids, yeah. It's the set of shutters that open up and expose your sensor to light by way of the lens. And next we have ISO. What's the ISO?
It's the camera's sensitivity to the light.
Exactly. The camera's or the sensor's sensitivity to light.
And it should be at the lowest in general.
Yeah, it's best to be at the lowest because then you're going to have the least amount of grain or noise in the picture. So that covers everything.
Yeah, awesome. You know, I can't wait to go and practice now.
Nerd. So it all sounds kind of simple, and in fact it is, but you really need to be able to have a off-the-cuff understanding of how you need to manipulate those settings inside of your camera to have your picture turn out the way you want it to. And really, I think that is probably the first thing you really need to know to start playing with your camera. Go out into the world, start taking pictures of like your kids, your dog, a tree, yourself, your foot, boba tea, LaCroix, and be sure to experiment with these settings and try to figure out the perfect mixture that you need to use to have the picture be properly exposed. So for now, we're gonna go ahead and sign off. Thank you again for watching. Kish, thank you very much for being here.
Of course.
Well, I'll have to bring you back soon, but until next time, cheers.